are listening to STR, The Sunday Times Radio. Culture, music, and beyond.
Hello, everyone. This is STR, The Creative Hour, and today we're having the most fabulous man in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Christopher Joshua Benton. Hello, Christopher.
Hey, hi. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. I know that you're going by Christopher, so this is how we're going to do it today. How's it going? How's the day? All good?
The day's good. Just the typical Dubai conversation of being complaining about traffic. But besides that,
But this season, honestly, it's like it's on. The traffic is on. So no, I get it though. I get it.
I read that 200,000 people have moved to Dubai in the past 2 years.
200,000 people, really?
Mm-hmm. And so the infrastructure is really struggling.
Oh God, insane. But yeah, I don't know. It's just you've been all around the place, like, weren't you? You've lived in so many countries by now, I guess. Like, how many have you visited, by the way?
Okay, I did a tabulation. I've visited 33 countries, but I've only lived in 3, I guess. England, America, and now here.
And could you call all these 3 your homeland or of some sort, like quote unquote homeland?
There was a time where England would have been a homeland only because my ex was there. And then where your mom lives is another home, so Virginia. And then where I am now is home, so Abu Dhabi.
Do you think having multiple homes is like an asset or a liability?
It depends on if you have enough money for more apartments and more storage.
And so like having 3 homes across 3 countries and having 3 apartments and storage, huh? Or
Yes. Also, like, side chicks. Like, do you have side chicks? Like a girl in every port, I think is the phrase they say.
Yeah. Interesting, actually. And also, being an acclaimed artist, I would say, in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, like everybody knowing your work and your style and everything, and also knowing that you've moved around the place, having 3 different countries and seeing 33 of them then, would you say this experience shaped your approach to art anyhow? Maybe diasporic experience or like the traveling or something?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think the more of the world we see, the more we stare into the void and realize how little we know. And so you definitely become more open-minded and you become more empathetic to how other people feel and how other people live. And when it comes to my art practice, I like to say this stock phrase when people ask me about the work I make. I say, my work is research around questions about how diasporic people bring a sense of homeland with them. Maybe thinking about my immigrant experience as someone who's lived in the Gulf for 10 years. And also thinking about my experience as a African-American man who sort of has this severed sense of homeland. Most African-Americans don't really know where they're from in Africa because of the horrors of the Middle Passage and the transatlantic slave trade. And so that sort of drives me wanting to know more about how other people think about home and homeland. So yeah, I do think traveling around makes you question, and also it makes you think about what it means to be a foreigner, of which we both are.
How would you define home?
How do I define home? I normally say home is where mother is. So if everyone's lucky enough to have a mother who's still living, I think that's definitely a place where home is. I think home is also where your things are.
Makes sense.
It depends on how many things you own, of course. Home can be where your lover is. I think home can be where your source of money is.
Everything at the same time.
What's that song by The Temptations? It's like, Papa was a rolling stone, wherever he laid his hat was his home.
Right.
So also, wherever your hat is,
Your home
is where the home is. But for me, I've called the UAE home for so long, just because this place has been so generous to me. I think people are always asking themselves if they're in the right place. And people can torment themselves about that question. And I just try to be comfortable wherever I am. But that doesn't mean that I'm not trying to figure out how to leave the UAE. Because I feel a little bit itchy. Because I've been here for a really long time. How long have you been here?
It's my 3rd year, so I'm a I'm a freshman, basically.
You're a freshman.
I'm still having like a fresher's flu
And
every other day.
And you're making a lot of impact, so.
Oh, I hope so. But like, I mean, being surrounded with people like you, it's kind of easy.
Thank you.
You just talk about this because even like why I'm asking as well is because the work that's called The World Was My Garden really made an like impression on me in terms of the absence of the roots of the tree. And when you were saying about being a foreigner, but like at the same time, if anyone listening to the podcast would go to Christopher's website and look at the tree that's like it's hanged up in like in the middle of the void, and you could see the web around it, and it has the roots, like sort of the roots around it, but it doesn't have the roots where the roots are supposed to be. This is very, I don't know, it's like maybe it's a different like pattern and it's a different theme rather than what you were implying to have there. But this is how I feel from time to time, being like a foreigner, also moving around a lot and everything. And it's just, I think it's just a really great capture of that.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm happy that you saw the work and that you didn't just see it, you also thought about the work and you looked at it. Because I think as artists, you always hope that people spend time with the work. And I know you weren't living here when that show came out in 2021. So I'm happy to hear that you still had a aesthetic experience because it's really hard when you don't see the work in person. Okay, so with that work, I was really testing out a few ideas and a few questions I had, and I had been doing a lot of research. And I was always a little bit curious about racial identity here in the Gulf states. Because me as a foreigner, I had encountered so many people who were Emirati, but to me reminded me of Black folks that I know at home, at least visually. They looked like family members I had even. And people often would speak to me in Arab and maybe say that I looked like I was Bedouin, maybe I was from the Emirates. And so I was really curious about who are all these really interesting dark-skinned Emiratis, and I was recommended this book called Slaves of One Master by Matthew S. Hopper. He's an incredible writer and researcher, and he did a lot of interesting research around the history that sort of circulated around the slave trade of the Indian Ocean, which I would say it climaxed around the late 19th century, early 20th century. And it really, maybe just to step back, what made his book really interesting is it talked a lot about diasporas, specifically the African diaspora, and how it still existed here in the Gulf states. And so when we think a lot about this sort of like mythologized image around pearl divers or date farmers, oftentimes like in like a history book or the sort of renderings we see, is normally this like light-skinned Arab body. But over 50% of the people who sort of ran these industries were actually slaves from East Africa. Or they're from Baluchistan, or they're from India, they're from or what is now Pakistan, areas that are now Iran. So really far-flung folks. And for the most part, they were, either slaves or indentured servants. And so I was really curious about this history and if there was a way to sort of tease out these histories, bring them to the forefront, just because it's not the most discussed thing here. In fact, I think maybe as a part of the assimilative project of Emiratization, it's a very new country. A lot of these identities sort of converged in this way to create this like national identity project, which makes a lot of sense, if it's a new place. And so for me, I was sort of curious about this history. I was wondering if we could talk about it in public through exhibition making. I was working with some really radical curators and radical directors who said it was okay, I think, to talk about these things in Abu Dhabi. at Abu Dhabi Art. So I'm really grateful to them for taking a chance on me and also the subject matter, and that the public's ready for that conversation, I think, is the thing.
That's
I think,
nice.
and I don't know if we'll talk about it more later, but you know, as an artist here in the UAE, censorship is something that you confront a lot. But the artist Jamiri said it's all about meeting the audience where they are, and the audience is ready for certain types of things at certain times.
That's great.
And so I was really happy that they thought the audience was ready for it. And I think it was, for the most part, well received. And so with that project, it was really about how can I circulate archives that are already existing. So I worked with Northwestern University Libraries, who have the largest sort of repository of images of colonial era East Africa. And I worked with an archivist of the Coachella Valley who's done a lot of research into basically what happened when the date palm was stolen from the Southwest Asia and brought to California. So she had done a lot of really interesting research about how that also shifted identities in the United States. And so it really kind of created this model about how can I work with historians and academics and also everyday people to sort of talk maybe more about these less told narratives of history. And then for me, there was a lot of gestures in that exhibition. There was 2 films, there was some sculptures, there were some found object gestures. But for me, what was really important was to maybe have this like really powerful symbol that could also become this like mediatized image that people who didn't see the exhibition would maybe see in some other kind of way, just thinking about how images circulate in the art world. And so I was like, okay, this is the first time I have a good budget. Let's do something powerful and
It
monumental.
was very powerful.
And so, yeah, there's this tree that's uprooted, and a date palm is really interesting because all the roots are actually in a ball. They call it a root ball. And yeah, I think for me, I wanted something that felt easy to read. I think the history is maybe less told and not super complicated, but some of the things I was learning was complicated. And so I thought it's important to have maybe like a clear visual metaphor that's accessible to as many people as possible, just so that people actually look at it and think. So for me, it was really thinking about, okay, how can I tell these histories maybe through like a very simple gesture, this like uprooted palm tree that's sort of suspended, at least for me, made me think a lot about how commodities are always sort of in the air and moving around, and it's never static. And okay, if this is how commodities move, this is also kind of how identities move. This is how commodities move identities. Because the sort of proliferation or the global appetite for dates all around the world is the reason why the slave trade was so big. Because both dates and pearls were just so popular around the early 20th century that it just needed more and more labor to make it happen and propagate. And so in this way, it's thinking, okay, how do the commodities move the people, which maybe shifts identities, which also shifts how people think about themselves, is some of the ideas around that exhibition. And also for me, I think because my work isn't my art, my artistic research isn't really about me. It's often about me working with other people. I think with that show, I also wanted to maybe start to think about myself a little bit in the sense of me as I was triangulating these 3 places of East Africa, the Gulf, and America, which are also places that sort of represent me in different kind of ways. Not East Africa, but West Africa for me. And of course, I lived in the Gulf for a long time, and of course, I'm an American.
No, actually, it's very interesting as well how you speak about your research, because as your Instagram bio says as well, that you've concluded you graduated MIT, right? The arts program. And first of all, why do Massachusetts Institution of Technology has an art program? How did that happen?
Yeah.
When I saw that was my first question. I was like, wow, but wait. How did that happen, if you know as well? And did the school actually like shape this approach of yours? I mean, you dig into this as if like a social scientist would do.
Thank you. I'm definitely not a historian of MIT, but there is this mythological story about the founding of the school. And I might be wrong. So if anyone's listening and want to correct me, and also I'm sorry, MIT Beavers. As I understand it, there was a charismatic artist named Georgi Kepish, and he had started to work with. He was embedded at MIT. He was interested in maybe starting an art program. He was really curious about art science collaborations, and over time he built this program around this notion of what does it mean for an artist to collaborate with scientists. And what emerged from that was called the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. Maybe the most famous graduate of that program would have been Michael Rakowitz, who's still really prominent today. And then about maybe 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the school rebranded, my school, which is ACT, Art, Culture, and Technology, my program, Art, Culture, Technology, took over CAVS, and the program is an experimental art school. It's a part of the School of Architecture, which is the oldest architecture school in America. And the program really looks at, again, art science collaborations. It looks at things like digital fabrication. How do you make things with machines? It also looks at art in the public sphere and thinking about how does art intersect with like culture and social practice. And it also looks at art outside of the white cube, so art in non-art spaces. And also things like conceptual art, artistic research are things that people engage in there. And so for me, I had a lot of different options for graduate school, and MIT made a lot of practical sense. Just because I worked as a creative director for a long time. I worked at tech companies. I worked at startups. Really? Yeah, I used to be the creative director of Huawei. It's like a Chinese.
Really? I know what that
tech
is.
Company.
Wow.
And so I was like, you know what? If I end up not staying in the art world, at least I have a really sick degree.
Oh, that is so cool. That's
and
like
I can just be like a tech bro.
Perfect plan B.
Yeah.
If that doesn't work out, then like London City babes.
Right? Because it's like, there's a lot of really great art schools, but sometimes people don't know them outside of the art world. So that was one of the things. But the other thing was, to be really gross and frank, I wanted to prove to myself that I could like perform at the highest intellectual level. Not to say that school is but
MIT sounds like intimidating for anyone you're speaking with. It's like, oh, would you graduate at MIT? Like, wow.
And I got straight A's.
Really? Were you the teacher's pet?
No, not at all. I think there were several classes that I almost failed. And maybe just because I was charismatic, they were like, you know what, we're just gonna let Christopher do what he wants. But yeah, no, but specifically for art, I think I had my main idea was I could either get really good at something I don't know how to do, or I could get a lot better at something I know how to do. So I don't really have any traditional art making skills. I would say I'm more of an idea person who's good at managing people. And so I was like, okay, I can go to like an actual art school where I'll learn maybe a little bit about fabrication. Of course, keeping in mind that art school mostly is about reading critical theory for some reason, which is very strange and problematic. Or I could go somewhere where they're really maybe radically thinking about research. And I'm like, okay, I'm good at research. I worked as a journalist. I started my career in journalism. And so I think that drives how I think about research. And then in advertising, you're always researching. My boss used to say, the best thing about advertising is you learn a little bit about a lot of things because you have to service your client. They can be in the industry. And so I was like, okay, if I go to MIT, I can really be at the forefront of different types of scientific discourses and research, and B, just really, just really like delve in deep firsthand research.
But looking at your work as well and the way how you describe the approach, is like you could see everything falling into one place, like a bit of everything, but then deep research and then like really like journalistic or like scientific approach. Yeah, as I said, like social sciences is very interesting actually. And I really love, to be honest, that in the 21st century can have like an artistic research with like, you know, using the data and like learning about stuff and everything. And especially you having so much of the local communities of MENA as well incorporated into this. And you could see like how you actually, because I mean, if anyone would follow Christopher on Instagram, you would always see like the cutest people from the local like communities and fabrics and everything. And the projects like Worked, for instance, also you've like collaborated with the local craftsmen. And it's so nice to see how you know, collaborate with everyone. And how do you even find like these lovely guys?
I'll just go back for 1 second.
Go for it.
I think there's a few different kinds of research, and I'm always disappointed that I'm not doing the right kind. Right?
What's the right
So
kind?
there's research of you're kind of consolidating things that already exist, right? And maybe you have access to certain types of archives that other people don't, or maybe sometimes things are actually kind of hard to source. But in general, like sometimes there's this like gathering of things that are already around, and you're just sort of, as an artist, you're sort of smuggling things from maybe one sphere, one field, and you're bringing it out into another arena or a different public, right? Because so many things in academia get kind of locked up, and then eventually the ideas will spread over time.
Yeah.
So how can I be this like conduit to spread these things that are maybe like more locked up or more obscure? Is one way I sort of think about research. But that's like a lazy kind of research, I would say. And another kind of research is how can I generate new sites of knowledge production completely, which for someone with like not so many resources like myself is normally firsthand, to use a bad term, ethnographic research, working with people, thinking more about like embodied knowledge, maybe one-to-one with someone, and then sharing that. Just because maybe that's like newer information that doesn't necessarily exist in any sort of consolidated public facing form. And so when I think about collaboration, I aim for the second kind of research that takes longer and is a lot harder and is maybe more personalized. And when it comes to my collaborators, I believe a lot in the happy accident. And I believe that people come into your life for a reason. When you're confronted with a new person, I think it's important to think about, why are we meeting each other in this coincidence? And I think when you ask that question, you find a lot of different opportunities to work with other people. Not in this like kind of mechanistic, extractive way, but more in this way of like, how can our energies collide? And I mean, oftentimes for me as an artist, I think, how can I use my platform and resources to help someone else, or at least for someone else to share their story? And so the question of where do I meet my collaborators, I would say like anywhere, all the time. Obviously, a lot of my projects are rooted in an area called Satwa, just because I lived there for 2.5 years. But yeah, I think anyone can be a collaborator. And I think if anyone ever wants to work with me, you can send me a message on Instagram and you can come to the studio. But no, I would say like my practice is 100% collaborative. I like to think of my practice in the terms of dialogic art. I often say my dream is for my art making to just be hanging out with friends. And sometimes I feel like I've gotten there, but I just need to like formalize it so that I'm also making some money, I think. But yeah, how can art making just be hanging out with my friends and talking is the dream.
Looking at your Insta stories, this is kind of what you do.
This is what I do.
This is kind of your already. And also speaking about the lucky chance of meeting people. In our case, it's a lucky chance of me chasing you from Abu Dhabi to Dubai for the past month. So
yes.
If anyone wants to try, that also works.
What you're saying is it's not easy. It's not easy. It's only because I went on vacation for a really long time.
No, but that's good. I mean, you gotta rest.
It was a very random vacation to Paris.
But it's really cool though. No, it's fun.
You are listening to STR, the Sandy Times Radio, culture, music, and beyond.
Honestly, I'm a fan of your social platforms because I could see so much cheer and joy and alegria over there all the time. And it's very, very cool. And I think that's why actually when you're looking at like Mubin and also an archive actually, as you mentioned before, like I could see you have an ag working with archives and sort of like this media and the LLC FZCO, right? That's the one. I mean, looking at it, it's also so, cheerful and fun and like so friends and family like things. I don't know, especially with I think it was in an archive where they had like this classical sandals. Fell in love with that one.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, there's a few strategies that I've learned over the years that I think are really helpful for me, at least in how I express myself. And one of them is how do you hide or how do you embed meaning in a gesture that feels very like lighthearted? So I think there's this like kind of seduction that one can do with humor. And then maybe if you look at the humor a little bit longer, you maybe see a more subversive message that talks about maybe more complicated and layered issues of things like labor exploitation or I don't know, the pitfalls of capital or, precarity or I don't know, various types of like social issues. I think oftentimes I sort of like hide it inside of a little bit of humor. To make it more digestible, but also then it kind of hopefully creates this moment of like recognition. Someone who's like a very careful viewer to where it kind of maybe creates like an aha moment. I think so. Like I would say, I mean, I don't know. In the art world, they often say like the worst thing you can be is didactic. And it's really tricky because you want to tell a good story because everyone's seduced by stories and everyone wants to hear a good story. And yet, especially me as a journalist, I always ask myself the question is like, okay, why don't I just like write an article about it? Like, what's the point of me making an artwork when I could just like directly tell you this happened and this was wrong, or this happened and you should think about it like this, or this is more complicated than you imagine and this is why. So as a writer, it's like I know how to write a story. And maybe the challenge with artistic research, of course, is how do you consolidate all the research you do into either a coherent narrative or a layered narrative or some sort of concise messaging? What is the artistic gesture that you can pull out that puts all that together? And so when I do these projects, I try to maybe tell the story, but in a way that maybe feels a little bit more new. And also I try to challenge myself to make sure that there's an immersive and aesthetic experience that comes out of it.
Yeah, you use symbols a lot as well. So like I could see that the semiotics plays a very big part in your work as well. And you could see like a story through symbols as well. It's like it's not Dixit, but it's it's way better. And actually also covering this season's theme about the modern tradition and how like the symbols change over time. I was also interested in how which symbols would you call like the modern traditional symbols of Mana, by the way? And then just like
of Mina.
Yeah.
I don't think I have the answer to that. I would say I don't know. My exposure to the Gulf, I would say, is relatively limited. I've been to Oman, Qatar, here, Kuwait. And each of these places are so different. And so I don't want to flatten it by saying one thing. But if I were to say the modern symbols of here in the UAE.
Of the UAE then, yeah.
I would say it would definitely include a mall.
100%.
Which, by the way, I love malls. There's no critique of malls by me. I love a mall. Dubai Mall is like my favorite place on earth. I would say a car for sure. I would say we definitely need a symbol that like represents labor and maybe like a working class labor because there's just so many people here working so hard. So like, I don't know, one of the symbols I use is a wheelbarrow, which is maybe a cheesy one, but I would put the wheelbarrow on my symbol list.
That's very
sure.
nice.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I probably need to create my own vocabulary of symbols and just like return to them a lot. So whatever's in the Mubin show, there's a chicken, there's a sandal, there's a shawarma on fire.
Yeah, the car we mentioned already, it was a G-Wagon, I think.
There's
there's
the white one. There's a SUV
SUV.
I think, I think in that show, I was actually, I was thinking a lot about like what would be these sort of like elemental symbols of here. And the sort of theory around that show was those symbols are very clearly sort of inscribed in the sky because you see them in the shop front signages of the shops in old areas of UAE. So like, it's sort of like if these shops are doing their job, which is, you know, fulfilling the commercial fantasies of the public, then their job is to represent those symbols. And what's so great about shops in old areas of the UAE is the guys who design it are like very logical designers. If it's a butcher, they put a chicken and they put a cow. And
very straightforward design.
And if it's a coffee shop, they put a tea and it says Lipton on it, you know?
I love this.
If they're doing window tinting, they put a Nissan Patrol. So like it's a very like great one-to-one relationship. And I've seen these graphic designers, you know, like design these signages, and it's so great. They go on Google, they search for chicken, and they find the highest res chicken. They don't care if they have a license for it.
The high res though.
As long as it's high res enough to print it large.
I love it.
And then so when I worked on that show, Mubin, one of the things that we were saying, me and the curators, I worked with a friend of mine named Sophie Arnie, and we were saying, okay, isn't it great that these like super talented, you know, South Asian graphic designers, in particular, a friend of mine named Faisal, who I worked a lot with on this project, isn't it cool how they're informal graphic designers, but they're really amazing, functional, vernacular graphic designers, and really like their style becomes inscribed in the city. Like the city sort of becomes their playground because you look around, you look up, and you see their designs everywhere. And so it's like, well, what if we think about their design style as a transmission of their homeland? You know, so if you go to a place like Kerala, for example, where Faisal is from, you know, you see a lot of retail areas that don't look different from, you know, Dira or Karama or Satwa. And so it's sort of thinking about this relationship between, you know, the sort of commercial fantasies that we all sort of believe in as consumers and how that's being fulfilled by, you know, the various types of labor that actually brings those goods to us.
Yeah.
And like, what does that network look like? How can you visualize it? And then like you're saying, like, what are those sort of elemental symbols that represent, if not the Gulf, for sure the Emirates. And so, yeah, those are the sort of some of the ideas around that show. And if you want to see that show, listeners, that a version of that work is up right now at NYU Abu Dhabi Arts Gallery, and that show is up, I think, through April.
Amazing.
April
so
2025.
everyone will have a chance to see it. But again, like it's like capitalism meets globalization kind of thing at the same time, and also considering the impact of like also like the Gulf and then around the Southeast Asia, and then also the Western countries influencing the UAE, at least, like if we're focusing on that. Do you think that traditional art forms or maybe traditional motifs or like some of the, you know, very, traditional is like a tricky word, but still some of the very local elements of arts, are they like rather in danger because of that? Or maybe they're more keen onto the reinvention or like meta or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think this project also brings up some of those questions. For example, if you go to Abu Dhabi, you don't see these light box shop fronts anymore. I think maybe around like 14 years ago, the municipality said, we don't like these signages. We want something that feels more uniform, more clean. So if you go to Abu Dhabi City, you don't have these really lovely sort of like vinyl signs with all these really creative sort of psychedelic graphics. You have these like sort of cutout letters that just say the name of the business. And with that shift, you really see a lot less creativity, a lot less personalization of these businesses. And I think it's a major loss. One thing a lot of people talk about is like in Abu Dhabi and also in Dubai is like these, I guess you call them like kind of like a corner store or a spetsy, these tiny grocery stores. Bakalas is what they call them here. Is, all the bakalas are called bakala, even if they're owned by different people. And before they used to have their own identities, their own graphics, their own names. And now they're just all bakala. And so, there is this sort of like global flattening that happens everywhere around the world. Also here, that is super unfortunate, which is one of the reasons why I do like to think about these shop front graphics as a type of archive, an archive of a city changing, just because I'm aware that at some point Dubai will probably make the same decision as Abu Dhabi, which is, maybe we want something more clean, something a little more of an international style. So I think one of the things lots of artists confront here, and sometimes it seems a little bit boring, and so I try to avoid it, but because the city changes so quickly, everyone is always trying to make different gestures of preservation. And so for me, I try to think about maybe this question of how do we preserve what's happening now. A lot of other artists maybe think a lot about nostalgia or their past. And so you see a lot of like gestures of maybe people going back to like thinking about what was it like here like 10 or 20 years ago, or thinking about like childhood memory or childhood trauma. I think lots of different artists have different approaches, and maybe thinking about how can they make sense of living in a place where things change sometimes overnight.
I think last time I went to bed, I woke up and there was a new road by my house.
Yeah. I feel like we need to come up with a name for this, because I think about this a lot. And I think maybe there's a word, but we need our own word.
Yeah.
Which is like when you're driving in the city and you just like immediately, and it might be the road you drive down every day. You drive down the road to go to work. You see all the shops, you see familiar cars, all the branching roads that get to it. And then like you get this sudden feeling of like, wait, where am I? And it's probably because this one building finally got finished, and you like notice it and you're like, wait, what am I lost?
This is such a strange feeling, but yes, I get it totally.
And and it's just like this weird, actually I came up with the term in my thesis, and I kind of hate the term, but I came up with a term, it's called utopic deja vu. And so this is my overly complicated way of... I think deja vu makes sense, right? Because it's familiar but strange.
Yeah, deja vu,
utopic. I added utopic. It's a very long answer. You have to read at least 100 pages to get there. But the idea was like... around this idea of, when you think about urban planning or cities, oftentimes there's this idea of a utopia that someone is trying to build. But then in thinking about the original definition of the word utopia, it means literally no place. And then
like a paradise.
But it means no place.
Like literally no
literally
place.
No
not
place.
Even like the very perfect heaven.
Not even
thing.
The very perfect place. So like the word utopia actually comes from a book called Utopia.
Yeah.
And it was a travel log, a fake travel log to a fake place. And no one knows what people thought at the time when it was written, because it was written, I would say, in the mid 16th century. And no one quite knows, okay, did people think it was a real place back when it was written, or did people think it was a fake place the entire time?
Okay.
But it's written as a satire of contemporary culture of the time. And so this distance allows you to kind of critique the space. But I always think it's interesting that this utopic ideal, when people think about the perfect place, there is no such thing as a perfect place. In any sort of like utopic fictions in science fiction, it's always a utopia is always actually a dystopia, right? When you watch any kind of film that's in the future, like these like utopic places are always actually like really dysfunctional. And so in this term utopic deja vu, I think I was trying to maybe refer to this like sort of public group hallucination that we sort of live in, where we all are kind of buying into this false vision of a society, and simultaneously in this place that has this like very strange relationship to the present, because here we're always sort of looking towards this like future, this utopic future actually, while also trying to hold on to this like very idealized false past that oftentimes we can like see the construction of the past in real time. For example, I mean, I'm from America, and a very problematic place. And the thing is, American history is we're always kind of renegotiating kind of things that might have happened in the past. But in general, like we kind of agree that certain things happened in a very specific way. And then maybe a book will come out and say, well, actually, this is a little wrong. But in general, like it's quite fixed. But like here in a place where the movement from like an oral history to written history is so much newer, and also a place that was one of the poorest places on earth, like just like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You see history sort of being remade in real time. Like you can see like the national narrative change, or like neighborhoods, the names will change for certain kind of geopolitical reasons. And so in this system, you see this like past being remade in real time to where you become more aware of how constructed the past is. I mean, we all know like a past is like really just like this false narrative created by like whoever's in power. What's the cliche? The past is made by the victor, I think, right? Or
the history is run by the victory. Yeah.
And also, as Zizek says, you know, history is really just a retelling of whatever the like dominant economic arrangements are of the time. And so we all kind of know this, maybe as good Marxists, but we're reminded of it constantly living here because you see the official national or historical story kind of change all the time. And so in this whole system, I came up with this idea of a utopic deja vu. Everyone's obsessed with the future or the past, and the present no one really cares about.
It's very interesting, actually. I'm going to use it for the name of the episode, I think, now.
Super. Let's spread it. I spent 2 years writing about some stupid ideas.
And reading more than 100 pages is just, but yeah. And especially with Zizek's ideas, it's you cannot get rid of them ever. If you had,
once you read it.
it's there forever. So.
I feel like Zizek kind of stopped writing, though. I think he's like scared to write.
Well, he should be. Kind of.
I think he's scared to write.
Honestly.
I think he got like almost soft canceled or something, and now he's like afraid of it.
I think, yeah, like you could get it. Like, I mean, I hope everybody are safe. Like, but on a very nice and last note, do you want to send maybe a time capsule for anyone who is listening to this episode? Maybe some message or something?
A time capsule. What does everyone else say?
Everyone, I don't know. Actually, I think you're the first person I'm asking to do this.
The first to send a time capsule.
Because every time I'm trying to do a different move.
Interesting. I would like to send a time capsule to myself.
That's good.
And that hopefully one day I will listen to this message and say, I'm really poor. And hopefully one day in the future, I'll listen to this and say, oh my God, I made it. I'm no longer poor. And I'll say, oh, I'm so happy. I was so anxious about being an artist and I did it. I figured it out. I figured out how to make money.
Amazing. Is
that a bad note? We're ending it on money. Can we end it on a different idea?
Do you want to? Okay, you can redo it. It's okay. It's your time capsule.
Okay,
so
my time capsule. I mean, I guess I'd rather find love than find money. So I'll listen back to this.
How about love and money?
Okay, yes. We'll find love and money.
Awesome.
Separate from each other.
Separate from each other, of course. No sugar daddies. No.
Yeah. My money and my love.
Amazing. That's lovely. That's lovely. I enjoyed it very much, to be honest, and I wish everybody, and to myself as well, money and love from separate places. Amazing. Love this. And I'm feeling things about the utopian deja vu now.
Yes.
I'm thinking about it. So I hope everybody else will enjoy listening to this, and stay tuned for the next episode. Hear from you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.